for those of us who haven't been to a meeting in a while, we are South Nashville Action People. We're the Wedgewood-Houston Neighborhood Association. We have been running in the neighborhood since 1979 and really doing an amazing job of collaborating with different developers that have come into our neighborhood and advocating for our neighbors and our neighbors' right to have a voice as development continues through the neighborhood. And so we're really grateful to Andy from CORE and then our team from AJ Capital, who are here to tell us about some things that are happening in the neighborhood and really inform us about what is going on, and then give us an opportunity to ask questions and then chime in regards to what we hope would be able to be seen or any concerns that we might have regarding those developments. So thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it. And Andy, why don't we go ahead and get started with you?
Sure. So I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Andrew Beard, and I'm with CORE Development. And CORE Development has been active in Wedgewood-Houston really since 2013, since we kind of entered into the rezoning process that's now kind of culminated in the last few phases of the finery down in Martin and Merritt. And I wanted to introduce my partners from Hastings, Chris Davis and Jesse Allen, if you guys want to give a little wave and intro.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, excited to be with you guys. Chris Davis, I'm the project architect and senior associate at Hastings. And this is Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm an interior designer at Hastings. Good to be here.
So we've been working pretty intently since October of last year. And for obvious reasons, there have been a number of things that have kind of come up that have kind of slowed progress. But nonetheless, our work with the existing landowners and really thinking through conceptually solutions for this particular site have been ongoing for quite some time. And I know you guys have been trying to figure out how to continue to further neighborhood discussions just amidst our current conditions, and really appreciate you being willing to meet with us virtually. I hope we can be effective in kind of communicating our ideas tonight. The first thing I wanted to do is just to clarify really why we're here and kind of where we are in the process. I will kind of show you a bit of a context map, but the property that is in consideration is 1321 and 1323 Pillow Street. It's just catty-cornered to a previous project that we completed about 1.5 years ago called Segment, which is on the south and east corner of Pillow and Merritt, and the property that we're looking at is on the north and west corner. We plan to submit an SP application, and we've gotten pretty far along in putting together that application. We didn't know if we were going to have a consultation meeting like this, and we were and have had initial conversations with the planning department, but have withheld our formal submission until having this conversation. The SP that we are submitting is intended to be compliant with the Wedgewood-Houston Chestnut Hill local area plan. I participated in that process on the steering committee, and I see a lot of you in the audience that were a part of that process as well, that we think is successful, and hope that this development, this SP application, realizes a number of the goals and intent that's embodied in that policy document. So SP application has not been submitted. We do want to have this conversation and the chance for you guys to ask your questions and to comment before we move forward. But just to let you know, the planning department has seen this, and I think they would say that we're within the strike zone, so to speak, in terms of policy applications for this particular site. from there, I'll just kind of give you guys a little bit of a high level, what's the vision? What's the concept? What's the proposition here? And before I do that, I kind of think back to just CORE's methodology and the way in which we were entered into and became acquainted with Wedgewood-Houston. And, two things that really come to mind for us especially when we begin to work with neighborhoods initially, is really identifying what are those kind of historical assets, those things that are present in a neighborhood that make it what it is today, before we ever start conjuring up, how we might contribute to that neighborhood, what makes that neighborhood what it is. And we, since 2013 have tried to honor what we see as a very unique kind of neighborhood identity for Nashville. And among many things, what we really picked up on, which was significant and worth accentuating and honoring, is really the presence of a diversity of uses, a diversity of users, and really a diversity of kind of real estate products, which is kind of goes hand in hand with the uses. But we, from that initial rezoning, we set out and really accomplished an SP for those first 7.5 acres for what we call the finery now. This mix of uses in a mix of which, Nashville had not seen. And specifically that was introducing light industrial uses into a typical kind of mixed use kind of zoning schedule. And we did this again with the idea that we wanted to allow for the market to respond in ways that are maybe familiar to the neighborhood. And without qualifying that in a multitude of ways, we did bring on the disc and cidery. We did begin to introduce a couple of different live work products as well as commercial and retail in an area that historically had been industrial. And so in keeping just with that methodology and working along those lines, we're looking at this site through a similar lens, albeit we have a different way of, I think, addressing, these same interests going forward. But nonetheless, we think that the product that we would like to bring to this particular site is one that we don't see in the neighborhood right now. And we do believe that it does give us the ability to maintain and grow, again, kind of the diversity, again, of users and uses in and around the neighborhood. And in doing so, it does kind of require that we bring about a certain scale of the project, that we have a particular approach as it pertains to parking, even green space, allowable uses, and things of that nature. And so I think I'll wrap it up without going into the specifics and hand it over to Chris and Jesse to begin to kind of take us through more of the details. And Chris, you can just kind of let me know when you want me to move slides so that I can keep up with you.
Great. Thanks, Andy, for the great intro and kind of the spirit behind what this project is all about. This slide is the aerial context, so we can help locate the site in particular. It is at the corner of Pillow and Merritt Street on the northwest corner. It is currently two smaller parcels that we would be combining into a larger parcel. And to give it the context of where Finery and the Martin Street kind of mixed use corridor is, and then Segment, which Andy and his team developed, which is a multifamily project. We can roll to the next slide.
Whoa.
Or the last slide. There we go. So this is really the intent of the specific plan. This is the kind of important language that is why we're doing what we're doing, and kind of the big ideas. And so, as Andy mentioned, we were really inspired by the Wedgewood-Houston Chestnut Hill planning study. And there were two goals in particular that we saw an opportunity to kind of go at. And the first is affordability and displacement. You know, as everybody's well aware, the neighborhood is changing rapidly. And I won't go into all the different typologies that are popping up, but one in particular that we saw as kind of a vacancy in the market was for sale micro units. And the idea is probably fairly self-evident, is that this provides an opportunity for people who want to buy into the Wedgewood-Houston neighborhood and are maybe coming out of a rental setup, and they want to stay in the neighborhood, but they maybe can't leap all the way into some of these larger units or the homes that are being built. And so the idea is that the vast majority of the units in this project would be 500 square feet, thus putting them in kind of a bracket of affordability. And what excites us about that, and what we think that provides the opportunity for, is to really promote this idea of socioeconomic diversity. You know, as people are kind of coming up in their lives and, you know, building on their real estate portfolios, or maybe they're coming the other way and, you know, they've been living out of the city and want to come back down into the city and have a place to stay, you know, but they don't need a massive spread, but they also kind of recognize and understand the vibrance and the brilliance of this little pocket of a neighborhood. And so this project would be creating, starting to fill this vacancy of for sale micro units. The second goal that we were really inspired to look at was this idea of artisan makers, musicians. And so what we're proposing on the ground floor of this project is to allow for live work units. And, you know, kind of the details of that are that the the work component cannot exceed 50% of the floor area, and it is capped out at 1,000 square feet. And so those are the kind of mechanisms that we are employing to ensure that we're creating spaces that are truly for small businesses, be they businesses that are just beginning and incubating, or maybe it's just they don't need a lot of real estate, but the ability to connect that work with the live above is something that we think just keeps people in the neighborhood during the daytime, and it's just a really important topology we'd love to see showing up more across the city.
Chris, yeah. I might interject just real quick.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I meant to just mention again is just the concept of bringing about a product that is going to enhance, you know, the diversity that we've kind of talked about, but really adapt as well. Obviously, I think we all see that the way in which we live, the way in which we work, and the way in which we travel is really changing at a rapid pace. And a lot of what is informing the way in which we're programming the site, the way in which we're designing these particular units is specific to a particular set of buyer profiles that we are seeing really grow. And I think two demonstrations of just that change in the neighborhood would be the Bento Living Project, really in Chestnut Hill, as well as the Martin Flats. We can talk a little bit more about that, but I just kind of wanted to let you guys know too that a lot of what's driving, you know, the concept here is really being able to introduce something that's relevant and adaptive.
Great, thank you. Before we slide off this, Andy, I just want to hit a couple of things real quick.
Sorry.
So I'm going to get into the kind of the nuts and bolts part of it. So I'll go kind of quick to preserve time, but please feel free during the Q&A to ask questions. So we've talked about the land use and our desire to bring in live work and this kind of artisan makers, musicians, and what we're calling other low impact businesses to the ground floor at a cap of 1,000 square feet for those spaces. So that's the land use side of it. When we come to massing and parking, what we're proposing is in line with the character area plan study for our character area, which is 2A, and that is a 3 to 4 story building. And so we are proposing that the SP kind of envelope we can build in is 3 stories up to 45 feet. Then there would be at least a 5-foot step back, and then the ability to do an additional story on top, capping out at 60 feet. So that kind of gives us a sense of the massing of the building. And then parking, we are proposing to park it at 0.75 spaces per residential unit. And we can talk more about how we got to that number and why we think that's appropriate for, just where people are going with their relationship to cars, but also, this project in this part of the neighborhood, and we can kind of dig more into the parking ratio. We can roll down now. So this is a diagram showing the land uses around our project. Ours is the yellow proposed development there, kind of in the middle. And I want to first and foremost bring your attention to the heavy green line, which is the boundary between character area 1 and character area 2A. And so you can see we're right on the border of that. And character area 1 is mixed use and commercial, and is really kind of a wide diversity of uses allowed. And then we kind of slip into character area 2, but then I want to draw your attention to the right side of the diagram, which shows, excuse me, additional commercial spaces. Sorry. And so, yeah, we can scroll down. So here's our site plan. I'm sorry, I'm going to cough a ton. You want to take over for a second?
Sure. So taking a look at our site plan here, this is to give everybody an idea of when we're talking about these live work units on this first floor. So you're seeing these larger units. Our parking is in the back of the building with the access of the alleyway that goes onto Merritt. As you remember from the last plan that we just looked at, if you head to the left on Merritt, we're back into that character area plan that includes a lot of the different types of uses, commercial, mixed retail, things like that. And we're showing some on-street parking along Merritt and along Pillow as well.
Yep, great, thank you, Jesse. And as Jesse mentioned, just again want to highlight that access on and off the site is located as close to that character area 1 as possible. And we've labeled our neighbors, the Design Collective and Vintage Millworks, are our commercial neighbors to the west. And then to the east, we have 2 SP neighbors, Segment, which Andy and his team developed, which is a series of flats. And then the WeHo Cottages, which is a larger kind of duplex townhome style development. All right. And so just stop here real quick to give a sense of the context when we talk about the massing of the building. Again, Segment and WeHo Cottages, just wanted to kind of give a contextual representation of what we are proposing. And this is actually a elevation diagram of the proposal. So while we mentioned being able to do 3 stories within 45 feet at the setback, and then an additional 4th floor up to 60 feet, we've actually been able to compress our project and achieve what we want to achieve in 45 feet. So it is 4 stories within the 45 feet, which is kind of our 3-story ceiling. And now we can get into the pretty pictures. So this is a view from Segment. So you're on the southeast corner of Pillow and Merritt Avenue. And so we can highlight the live work spaces down below, then a series of flats above before a step back onto the 4th floor. where we have terrace units. One thing that's really fun about this project that is we've been devising this idea of micro units and living in Wedgewood-Houston and trying to weave all of that together was we stumbled on this idea of bringing circulation in these porches to the corner of Pillow and Merritt. So instead of giving that corner to, you know, maybe the highest end units, we're proposing to make that amenity space that can be activated by the residents. So, you know, when you buy a micro unit, maybe you don't get a chance to, you know, have a porch. So what if we create more of a communal space to do that? And so that's what's happening here at the corner. And we can scroll down to the same view, but in the daytime, so you can kind of see how the mesh that we're using here on the corner kind of lightens and then solidifies that corner, and then obviously creates an opportunity to grow greenery up. And we've got the perfect kind of sun angles here for growth here. So we're excited to explore this. And you can see kind of the treescape. We've actually already worked with some arborists on what is going to be required by the city. And so while it may look a little heavily wooded right now, this is actually what would be required and what we're proposing in the SP to do on our site. And then our final rendering, we wanted to kind of bring you down onto the sidewalk a little bit more and give a sense of how we think it'll feel to kind of be up against the building. Again, bringing in as much green space as we possibly can. We've got a 10-foot setback on Pillow Street to help kind of reconcile the location of our building to our neighbors and give a bit of a lawn. And we've actually got this earmarked as a bioswale to kind of help deal with water accumulation on the site. Then you can see one of our live work spaces illuminated, and then just to the side, another kind of gathering space that we've kind of interspersed these opportunities throughout the project. I think that's about it.
Kat, I know we went over our time a little bit. I apologize, but we're happy to answer any questions, comments now, and we're also happy just to kind of I can give my contact information just for further conversation after this meeting, or we can hang around on the Zoom call after the second presentation as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Why don't we go ahead and allow for 10 minutes for questions and feedback, and if we end up needing more time, we can push that towards the end. Great. So anyone who would like to provide any feedback, or if you have questions about this proposal, go ahead and speak now.
Yeah, hey guys, Jeremy Kelton here. Project looks really cool. Would love to hear the latest thinking on the number of parking spots and how 0.75 units or spots per unit was come to. Love to hear your thoughts on it.
I'll go ahead and start, and Chris, you can chime in. Jeremy, it's a good question, and I will say too, this is not an element of the application that Metro has seen yet. I'll also say that Colby has really urged our team to get aggressive on parking exemptions and I think a lot of what's driving that is for him is kind of reading into the policy and moving towards, more green space, kind of smarter kind of site planning, and not like being completely driven by, the parking structure and creating parking spaces that are questionably relevant kind of going into the future. So that's kind of the starting position. The other thing is the code, the code as it speaks to parking, and this is a general kind of parameter that is in the code, is that you cannot take more than 25% exemptions on balance when you start factoring in proximity to public transportation, things of that nature. So there's a little bit of a precedent already kind of buried in the code that kind of talks about that 25% number. So that's also informing it. And then secondly, we really believe that the buyer profile for this particular product is not going to bring with it the same kind of parking demands that you would see in other product that, you know, is more typical to this area. And, you know, again, this isn't apples to apples, but the Martin Street flats, for instance, which is more of a co-living format, and even a smaller format living space than what we're talking about. And just to clarify, we're defining micro units being less than 500 square feet. So, you know, most of the units in our project are right around 450 square feet, whereas Martin flats they're almost like adult dorm rooms. They're like 275 square feet. That project is providing 30% of the typical parking requirement for multifamily. And again, I'm not saying it's not apples to apples correlation here, but I'm just kind of using that as a means to say that we're trying to adapt the parking ratio to meet the buyer profile and the use. And so that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, the urban zoning overlay is designed to kind of nudge us away from having as many cars in the city. And so there are two mechanisms. One is our proximity to transit, and the other is our sidewalk connection to a larger commercial zone that allow us to each take 10% reductions in the parking requirement. So that brings us down to 80% already, just right out the gate with the zoning. And so then what we're factoring in on top of that is we're trying to then make it work with about a 5% reduction on top of that to provide a deeper lawn along Pillow that allows us to be more responsive to the neighbors, provide more kind of grass and green space. We could, I guess, potentially push the building toward Pillow and gain 2 more spots, which is actually about the difference between being at 75 and 80%. And so, but just to clarify, you know, 80% is kind of where the city is starting on a parcel like this. And so then we're really talking about a 5% reduction from that.
I mean, the parking is
Gotcha,
it's a big conversation, and I know it's one that's a sensitive one. Another thing that we were kind of factoring into, if I might slip this in, and I'm sorry if I interrupted somebody, is just the context within which we're going to be marketing and selling is going to be radically different by the time we get to market. And that's just because of the final phases of the finery. That also has to do with the initial stages of the outpost development that I think AJ Capital is involved with. And then the Natchez Group, you know, they're off of Hagen Street. The amount of commercial kind of retail amenity space, the amount of multifamily residential, the amount of office space that we're going to see, again, by the time we get, you know, through entitlements and built, is going to be radically different. And you're starting to see, you know, obviously your central business district, you know, doesn't have parking requirements. I'm not saying that we should go that direction here, but also you're seeing no parking requirements along the major corridors. That was something that was approved. So again, we're not saying that we're in a space where we think it's warranted that there's no parking requirements. But we do think that this portion of the neighborhood is trending towards more of a higher density. It is mid-rise kind of urban context. And that's why we feel like being right on the cusp or the transition of that neighborhood center justifies some of our propositions on that front.
So could you just clarify the number of kind of like the 500 square foot spaces, the number of kind of the artisan spaces, and then the number of parking spaces. Because I mean, I think that obviously helps with the context in that you would expect the artisan spaces, if they're going to be what you're suggesting, will drive some traffic of parking needs, maybe during the day, not during the night. But you know, that's going to impact, to me, the neighborhood area where people are going to come in and go, hey, I need to park somewhere because I'm going to go meet somebody. How do you manage
Right.
that?
Right. I'll speak to it at a higher level, and then Chris, if you want to, you can chime in maybe on the specifics. But I will say right off the bat too that the way in which we're defining live work is again something that the specific definition, we haven't pitched that to Metro. And to be quite honest with you, Metro has been very resistant to to straight kind of commercial uses at grade, and even resistant to live work. We as a team fundamentally kind of disagree that this particular location is not appropriate for certain kind of light impact non-residential uses or kind of light impact commercial uses. And we believe that just in terms of, you know, creating a vibrant streetscape, you know, creating uses during the day that I think are beneficial, you know, to even residential uses and can be complementary from a parking standpoint, from a security standpoint. And again, we think we're located, you know, so closely, you know, to that character area 1 that we feel like that's important. But I did want to let everybody know that, just to be transparent, we're getting pushback. And I think if the neighborhood really would like to see these flex spaces, which we haven't really had a chance to talk about fully, but these kinds of spaces that'll allow for non-typical kind of live, work, kind of flex spaces that kind of open up the market to a diversity of uses. I would just say we're going to need, I think, the community's kind of support, or at least, you know, the community to not have a problem with it before we can move forward. Otherwise, they're just going to become, you know, larger kind of condos on the base, which we can do that. But I would love to hear tonight if people have real objections. And my guess is that part of your question is tying that back to the parking. So at that point, I'll just hand it over to Chris if you want to complete that answer.
Sure. If I understood, there was a kind of a question about the unit mix, and we've got this nice kind of envelope of the building we were able to share with you all. And what we haven't developed as much is the way it is all broken down. For example, if you want to stop here, Andy, we've talked about, you know, these were originally conceived as single level live work, but we've begun to talk about, do we create new demising walls and actually have a vertical stack of a live on top of a work. And so what was important for us was to kind of define the shell of the building and then tie our unit quantity to a parking ratio that would then become the kind of 2 levers that govern how many units we can actually build in here. I'm going to pull this number. It's not totally accurate, but it's close. We are approximately 75% units that are 500 and less, 500 square feet and less. So 75% of the units would be micro units. And then we've got a smattering of 1 and maybe a 2 bedroom here and there to kind of fill in some of the funny angles in the building. So to answer your question, not totally set on how many units there are. I want to show you some of the flexibility that or some of the conversations that we are currently having about how we might adjust. If you guys love the idea of live work, then maybe we can introduce more live work and or as Andy mentioned, if it's a no-go, then we can talk about, do these just become ground floor units? So I'm not trying to not answer your question, but the units are still a little bit squishy right now. But it's really the massing of the building and the parking ratio that we are trying to use to kind of tie, kind of bracket what this unit count could be.
So, I mean, I think we can also get a little, the footprint that you're looking at in this building envelope as well. Right now, we're looking at right around plus minus 40 units. And Chris, of those units, how many of those, we're just like 20, how many of those are the 500 and less square feet?
I was going to say, close to 30 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't do that math in my head very quickly, but it's about 30.
All right, guys. Out of respect for people's time, let's go ahead and move on to AJ Capital. We can circle back around for questions, comments for this project at the end of the meeting, but I just want to make sure that people who have planned their schedule around this meeting are able to interact with AJ's proposal as much as possible as well. So Jack, are you there?
Hey, I'm here.
Hey, all right. All right, so if you would go ahead and share your screen, we can start.
All right, can you guys see that?
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, well, thanks again for having us here today. I'm Jack Richmond with AJ Capital. I've been working in the neighborhood since, we've been working in the neighborhood since 2015, starting with the May Hosiery project. I've got Nick Dryden is here as well with our team, who's been working on May Hosiery since the beginning. And since May Hosiery, we've also worked on the Nashville Warehouse Company project, formerly known as Outpost, but that's at the corner of 4th and Chestnut. Those office buildings are rising now. And so the third phase of our development in the neighborhood is on this screen in the highlighted in yellow. And today we're just here to give a preview at a high level. Our master plan will be ready in about 3 weeks. And so for the next meeting, more members of the team will join Nick and me here to discuss the project. And so we look forward to that. We just wanted to give a preview here for this Humphrey Street Market project, our phase 3 of our development here. And it's a mixed use plan. And like I said, the site plan will be ready. The master plan will be ready to share in about 3 weeks. A mix of office, residential, and retail uses along Houston Street, Martin Street, Brown Street, and Humphrey Street, as you can see here highlighted in yellow. So just at a high level, it is a mix of uses, office, residential, and retail, that we hope to, that we think will really celebrate the neighborhood and the history and build upon our project here, May Hosiery and Nashville Warehouse Company. We anticipate incorporating a lot of art, public space, a town square type feel to host farmers markets, neighborhood events and activities, and are really excited to share more here in the next few weeks. Nick, is there anything that you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. But Kat, thank you. It's good to see you. It's been a while since we've connected, but and everyone else here on the call. I will add to that. We've recently we've, as Jack had said, we've been involved with May Hosiery for the last 5 years. We're also advising on Nashville Warehouse, and then recently have joined the Humphrey Street Market team. But I think the opportunity, and we have some history working with the previous owners, on some kind of planning levels with their property, which include the Merritt Mansion site and the surrounding properties that are now part of this greater master plan. But I think one of the things I'm most excited about this project is the opportunity, and Andy touched on this before, building on the history of the evolution of the neighborhood, and with a lot of different projects happening throughout the neighborhood, the opportunity for this particular project, because of the centrality and the location, and also the scale, and also the history, with the Merritt Mansion being kind of a jewel in the middle of this site. I think there's a real opportunity to create, kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of a town square, organizing property that not physical property, but kind of an elemental property to this project, but also the greater neighborhood. So that's something that we're really starting to talk about at a really high level, just as we start to understand the property, in and of itself, and its relationship to its adjacencies, but also to the greater neighborhood. So we're excited to, talk to you guys about that, and include your input on that conversation as well, because I think this really exemplifies that as an opportunity to really help weave the neighborhood in a lot of ways together, because there are a lot of big efforts happening in the neighborhood that I think are important for them to all, to relate in a lot of ways. There is some elevation to this site, which is interesting. The Merritt Mansion, just, kind of following and understanding the history of that piece of property. That house was actually, the original house was built as a traditional Tennessee dog trot cabin, when that was originally a land grant, and that cabin was actually located, I can't remember exactly the exact location, but kind of closer to where Greer Stadium, the Greer Stadium site is or was, and then it was actually moved to its current location because of its elevated elevation. So they wanted the house to kind of be, on a higher elevation. And then the current house, as we all see it today, was built over several evolutions. And the original dog trot cabin, I don't know how many of you had the chance to go in that house, but it's pretty amazing. But the original cabin is actually inside that house. So it's kind of been built around and kind of encapsulated, and, literally preserved in that sense. So there's a lot of history kind of in and of just that house and what that contributes to the neighborhood. And I think that, and it has a really interesting, rich story of evolution in and of itself, and how it related to, the land that was at one point, owned by a family, and then over time sold off, and then, developed over time. And I think there's an interesting narrative there, with that one little piece to really build on, and that's going to be, I think, a really great opportunity to really tell a great story.
Thanks, Nick.
Was I on mute the whole time? Okay.
You were not.
I'm kidding. That's happened before.
Jack, are you, is that the bulk of your presentation thus far?
That is. And so, like I said, we'll have the master plan to share. We just wanted to give a preview tonight as we get ready to share that. And we'll have a larger presentation at the next meeting, and look forward to sharing everything that we've been working on, and really excited to share it with the neighborhood.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and move into a question and answer session. And if you guys just have any thoughts that you also just want to be heard, feel free to make those known as well.
I have a question for Nick and Jack. You have these three, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
You have the three different projects, red, blue, and yellow. And with the yellow portion, the Humphreys Street Market project, it has so much variation in it, both in topography and streetscape and street frontage, current building types, current usages, neighbors, adjacencies, all those different things, right? So there's a lot going on there. It's quite complex. Can you touch upon what you've started to think about of what the different character might be and what different uses from Houston Street to Humphrey Street, Martin, and so forth, and how that relates to the existing buildings and users? And I'll point out here, I'm sure you know, and for those who might not, but SNAP's community center building is nearly adjacent to this. It's across the street on Humphreys. And then also SNAP housing units are adjacent to this on the eastern portion, I believe probably directly adjacent to the Merritt Mansion property, if that's here on the yellow. So yeah, your thoughts on the adjacencies and use, different character types.
Jack, you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
Go ahead.
That's a great question, Eric, and I think that's one that that will definitely define this project quite differently, I think, than other developments. I think, there's a real value in green space and public space. I think you can see, like with the Nashville Warehouse site, there's quite a bit of kind of green space and open space that's dedicated to public gatherings and public events. Kind of the same with May Hosiery, all the interstitial interior alleyways and kind of plaza areas, that all the interstitial zones between the buildings. May Hosiery certainly doesn't take advantage of its maximum potential yield for that potential site, but as kind of developer, as a developer would look at a potential site like that. But that's also the kind of beauty of that site, because it has room to breathe, and it has, it doesn't have it's not trying to maximize the density of the site. And it's quite different too, because that obviously those are historic buildings that that we wanted to celebrate and preserve, and not really, manipulate and modify too greatly. So, the difference will be that this is mainly new construction, just like Nashville Warehouse Company. But I think the goal is to really, not build these giant blocks of buildings, but really be sensitive to the neighborhood and to the street experience, activating streets and alleys, and creating kind of interior interstitial spaces within the blocks, so that we're not just kind of building out solid blocks that cannot be experienced and cannot be activated and penetrated. So I think you can, I think we'll continue that typology, really started from May Hosiery, extending that kind of interstitial site planning, breaking up these bigger blocks into smaller blocks, both in footprint and in pedestrian exposure and access and activation, but also in mitigating building heights, having a variety of building scales and building types, so that and architecture. I mean, we don't want this to be this big cohesive institutional complex. We want it to be, you know, very human, and we want it to be very rich and diverse, and for it to really celebrate the context. So I think, you know, there's an interesting and rich context to pull from, you know, directly around us, but also kind of within the greater district. And a lot of that will come through, I think, in some of the ways that the programming can be really activated by public space. You know, there is an interest also in incorporating some, you know, affordable housing type product and micro housing type product, as well as, you know, creative office and retail and, you know, event type spaces, and, you know, a pretty full, you know, as full of a mixed use program that you could imagine. But to do that, I think very well, I think you have to, you know, balance that with open public space and interstitial space that you know, welcomes activation and inclusion. So, you know, I think you can see that through you know, many great examples of you know, hyper mixed use developments that are really successful and really advocate, you know, responsive contextual design. So I think that's kind of a long-winded answer there, Eric, but I think the idea is that it's a very complex, you're right, it's a very complex site. And I think that, you know, that the topography and the kind of elevation change, you know, between the high side of the site all the way down to Houston Street is pretty dramatic, but I think that also gives it, you know, this real opportunity to be kind of this, you know, centralized plan that really puts some order to a little bit of the chaos that kind of happens, you know, among those few blocks.
I guess I had one question as well. You know, a lot of this obviously rotates around Humphrey Street. That's a pretty busy street now, and people park along that. Have you put any thoughts into the implications of the additional traffic and people driving through? Because it is pretty narrow once you get two cars going either way,
Yeah.
and parked cars on both sides. I mean, that would be a big concern compared to like Chestnut, where obviously it's a much wider street for more cars.
It's funny, the first time I really started spending much time up there, and this was kind of previous to AJ, but when the Followells owned all that property, and I started spending some time up there kind of with them, looking at just kind of what they had, and just putting some of that together piece by piece. There's an alley, you know, behind, basically the alley that goes up, starting at, or I guess it's not an alley. Is that Brown Street? Brown Street comes off of, what's the alley that comes off of Martin and then tees into Brown Street?
I believe Brown Street might technically cross Humphrey Street.
Right.
And die.
That's right. And then it kind of dives into that concrete pump site. And then there's an alley that T-bones into that. And we were working on a project with Andy and Core down on Martin Street on the Kirby property, but we all collectively kind of had the same impulse, but you know, we wanted to kind of close those alleys to, and possibly even talked about Humphrey Street, like limiting vehicular traffic on Humphrey Street, just because it seems like such a potentially amazing, like walkable, and talk about, you know, doing something that Metro's going to push against. But the impulse was that we wanted to just create more walkability. And I think the way that we're going to do that is push that onto the site, much like those interstitial alleys provide. You know, once May Hosiery is open and kind of done, once construction's done, there's going to be this great little network of you know, little alley streets kind of within the property. And I think that that's a great inspiration, you know, to kind of create those little pedestrian experiences and to kind of help activate these bigger blocks. But I agree with you. I think some of this development and some of the activation along Humphrey Street with some retail and with some activation will also kind of help calm some of that traffic down, just because it's kind of a little bit of a really quiet, you know, stretch right now that I think, you know, with developing some urban edges there, I think that'll help with some traffic calming, as well as, you know, more activated pedestrian opportunities.
I mean, I would have thought you're going to drive more traffic because of what you're going to try and put in there. Therefore, we're just going to see a lot more traffic coming from between 4th and, you know, Chestnut and 8th, and they'll just drive straight down Humphreys. So I just think that somebody needs to look at the width of Humphreys and whether you put allowed parking or not on Humphrey Street.
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to, you know, it is dangerous and people speed down through there.
Yeah.
And it's narrow. It's not really 4 cars wide when you've got 2 cars parked and 2 people driving side by side.
Yeah, you know, I think part of the process will involve a traffic study for sure, which will help identify some of those pressure points. So we'll definitely have to address that.
I agree with those concerns, and I think you know, an attention to studying that can provide some solutions that are better than what's there right now, even when the density increases. Are there conversations as you go through this? Will you be having conversations with the planning department and looking at some of what they're doing? Maybe you're aware on Chestnut Street, they're studying Chestnut Street in a road diet and bike lanes and things like that. And so it'd be great, especially because Humphrey Street is a cut through as a continuation of Chestnut from 8th to 4th. It'd be great to study that and kind of look at different options. You know, closing it seems like a cool option.
I know.
I doubt planning would go for that, and that causes issues, of course. But you know, what other possibilities are there?
Yeah.
Would a 3-lane with a center turning lane make sense in some places? I think that's what's being proposed at Chestnut. But yeah, that would be exciting to kind of study what's possible and really address parking, bikes, pedestrians, all those things.
Yeah, no doubt. It definitely will be part of that. We've not had those conversations with them yet, but I know, you know, with that Chestnut study happening, they will definitely want to connect this with that study for sure.
Hey, Nick, this is Andy.
Hey, Andy.
Can you hear me? Hey, buddy. Hey, just in terms of thinking through kind of interior alleyways and alternate means of connectivity, I'm going to mark this up. Let me see. Can you, whoever's got the steering wheel, can you scroll up just a bit so I can see the bottom of the slide?
Like the bottom of the page?
A little bit more. I'm just going to show, okay, that's good. So here's our project.
Yep.
There's an alley, an unimproved alley that runs like this. So we're improving that section of the alley along our property. I think, you know, how to make that connection could be quite interesting, just as a means of another kind of pressure release valve, but also just placemaking opportunity as well. And I think the Nashville, you know, the Civic Design Center has done some studies again on alley activation, and I know I've spoken with Eric, and could be the subject of a really good Converge, meeting again, as
Absolutely.
developers in this area just kind of talk and think kind of strategically about how we can kind of together raise the sea level as it pertains to some of these pedestrian and vehicular connections that would take pressure off of some of these main streets.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, to me, that's kind of where it starts, like kind of working kind of within and then out, and how those kind of, that whole circulatory depressurization really happens, but also just like you said, the placemaking, opportunities that offers. I think that's a big part of it. And a lot of those just being pedestrian, not even making the vehicular, trying to keep that, it's a balance, obviously, of, we got to deal with the vehicular pressure that's happening and mounting all around, but also like how to keep it out as well, and how to activate on a pedestrian scale.
Well, I think, the beautiful thing about a truly urban environment is that it gives options, right? And I think, just good block and tackle alleys, block orientations and things like that will obviously begin to kind of self-correct some of those things. But we really do need Metro Public Works on our side, and we need Metro Planning on our side. And I think this is kind of where SNAP can, get involved in working with us to find solutions that are optimal for the neighbors that live there, the business owners, and all of that. Because I'll just say there's a lot of synergies, I think, in theory in our policies, but when we as developers begin to make specific zoning applications and things like that, and when it really comes down to getting approvals for doing things that may be a little bit out of the ordinary or require more time or whatever, it's really difficult to get approvals. And a lot of times it really just takes political pressure, in order to do that. And I think it's great. I really think the development community in this neighborhood is overall progressive and wants to do the right thing. There may be exceptions to that. I'm sure there are, but anyway, I just think it's these kinds of conversations that can generate some support and concepts that we can go to planning Metro with. It's super important.
I've got a quick question.
Oh, sorry, Betsy, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I apologize that my video camera is dead on my computer. And I'm not at my desk, but anywho, I do have a question. I love all the conversation about, all of these big things coming, working together to make them more cohesive and use a scalpel as opposed to a sledgehammer. I think we've got a lot of good people thinking about how that comes together, in the architecture and the urban environment. But as I look here and see these, big colored squares, it makes me really excited, being someone that's focused on sustainability and the challenges that are facing the planet and our urban environment. Of course, I do want to see a pollinator meadow in the front yard of Merritt Mansion. Just saying, that would be so badass.
Yeah.
That would be really badass. But even more so, since I think it comes to operations of these types of buildings and these uses and these offices and restaurants and hospitality, can we get some district scale composting or biodigesters? I mean, how do we keep this much square footage of building from just spewing trash when it could be making compost for, the whole damn neighborhood and everything cool that's going on? So I guess my challenge, this isn't about architecture, isn't about urban planning, but operationally, when have this type of real estate portfolio, can we become really responsible with how those buildings function. And in order to do that, those facilities need to be kind of planned for at the front end. So I don't know if it's much of a question, but more of a request.
No, I love that. I love hearing that. I mean, I think there's a real, obviously at a scale like this, not only this project, but just, you know, with Mayhosiery and Nashville Warehouse Company, there's a huge opportunity for a lot of outreach, which again, I think to Andy's point, like is a real opportunity for, you know, partnering with SNAP in the neighborhood and several interested efforts like you just mentioned, Betsy. I mean, you know, everything from, you know, youth activity and fitness and education and nutrition, but also, you know, sustainability and construction and also operations. I think those are all huge kind of front end conversations, I think, that can really drive some, like that's how you get that kind of, you know, pollinating field, right? In a project, you start talking about it now. So
Absolutely.
and I think, so I appreciate you talking, I mean, bringing that up. And I think that those are, you know, those are not just like kind of developer selling points, talking points, but those are real, truly, you know, integrated operational components to, you know, hyper sustainable development approach. So I think there's an opportunity for that for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Nick, if you don't mind, when we were speaking with Uday and Jack, for those of you who don't know who are on the call, Snap had a private discussion with AJ Capital so that we could get an idea of what was happening in the development. Uday mentioned that that this project involved bringing in 40 to 50 storefronts, which I feel is information that the neighborhood is crucial for the neighborhood to understand, and that the tenants for those storefronts would be organizations like a Nike store, that kind of stuff. And when talking about neighborhood development, I think one of the things that I've heard in the process of these conversations is that, you know, we want Wedgewood-Houston to be more focused on Wedgewood-Houston and less on the city at large or tourism. And so I was wondering if you would speak to that a little bit so that the neighborhood can understand what that means and how that impacts them.
Yeah, I wasn't on that call, and I don't know.
Take that one, Nick.
Go ahead, Jack.
So Kat, I think the point in talking about the number of storefronts is we have a lot of scale and opportunity here to bring a mix to celebrate neighborhood and local stars, but also bring cool, you know, at the proper scale. This would be like the Nike boutique you mentioned would be something cool and small at the proper neighborhood scale, not like a chain or anything that you've, you know, seen at a mall, like the opposite of that.
Yeah, I think also just to add to that, the only thing I've heard about the Nike thing was really more about the kind of partnership, the community partnership interest, and this kind of started at Mayhosiery, but community partnership interest in, you know, building, you know, youth athletic programming and stuff like that, more than, you know, than just kind of a flagship retail store. So I think that's my understanding of that partnership, as it goes kind of deeper than just a retail store. Is it's really, you know, the programming that, you know, that corporate programming like that a lot of people like, you know, Nike and Apple and Patagonia and, you know, big people like that can bring into developments, but also just enriching, you know, programs like that is what I've heard and was excited about.
Thank you. I think that helps clear it up a little bit. Do we have any more questions for AJ Capital before we cycle back around to Andrew and his team, if anyone has questions there?
I might just try to add, was that somebody else with a question?
Yeah, that was me, Eric, but go ahead.
Bill, go ahead. I've already.
Okay, to everyone, I'm a Luddite, and so this is my first Zoom meeting really, and so I'm on there as administration because I didn't know how to put Bill in there. So anyway, for those who don't know me, I've been on Humphrey Street for 40 some years. So anyway, the point I want to make is, Nick, you said that, you know, the mansion is the jewel of the neighborhood and you'd like to weave it into the neighborhood. And I would just like to make the point that I think of that property, the real jewel is the green space that's there. I don't know of any other green space except maybe Fall Hamilton School, but there's such a big chunk of green that I would truly like to see respected and kept. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with Bill too. Thanks for adding that. I wonder if I can tie my comment to that a little bit and to Betsy's. It's adding to Kat's question about these corporate businesses that might have retail fronts here. I think that idea of large corporations coming in to a neighborhood has a variety of tensions and concerns about it. And without dismissing those, I wonder if we could look at what the potential of something like that could be. And I think Nick, maybe you, Nick or Jack both maybe touched upon this, but maybe Uday made the comment originally that Nike would do something that was neighborhood relevant. That's complicated and confusing, and I'm not sure what that means. But if that could be really pursued with any of these larger corporations or entities that would come in, I think that could be great. And these huge international corporations like Nike and like Apple are some of the businesses that are at the forefront of things like what Betsy's saying with infrastructure, sustainable programming, and there's another term she used. But to get to some of these things like composting or like a meadow in the green space and saving the trees on some of these parcels, it may be that these huge international corporations actually would have the means and the knowledge and the resources to help bolster all of those efforts. So I would encourage, just to add on to some of these disparate ideas, or all these great ideas, maybe some of these organizations can help tie a lot of that together. And I'm hopeful that there's a positive synergy with all of those things going on.
Yeah, me too.
All right. If anyone has, let's say one more question for AJ Capital, and then we'll move on back to Andy. Okay, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you being here. I know the neighborhood really appreciates you being here as well. Andrew, would you like to answer further questions right now? Does anyone have further questions for Andrew from CORE?
And I'm definitely here, and we'll stay on as long as people have questions.
I have a question.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
We haven't talked in a long time.
It has been a while.
Yeah. So the parking is 0.75. Okay, limiting the cars. So is there any place for bicycles to be parked or scooters, or are they expected to be hauled up to the living quarters, or what? Are you doing anything to make it easy for people to have their car transportation units dealt with?
It's a great point. And yes, we're going to be designing, the building and the programming to accommodate things such as bike storage, bike repair. I think, scooters is another, something that we haven't specifically talked about, but definitely, with regards to bikes. So, the buyer profile that we're looking at, we feel like are going to be buying there just because of proximity to amenities. And we also believe that they're, by and large, we're going to see more buyers that are making, lifestyle decisions that are related to these issues of sustainability and alternative forms of transportation with ride shares and all of that. But we haven't gotten to the scale of design where I could show you, where bike storage is going to be had or whatnot. But we're really incentivized to do it because we think the buyers are going to require it. Not all of them, but I think we're starting to see that. And so, we're in a position to meet our market's interests, and I think that's the direction, and that's going to be a lot of the thrust of who we're marketing to. So
yeah, I'll just add on to that. The code would require us to have one bike rack per every 4 dwelling units, and I think that would be way underneath what we would ultimately want to do from a market standpoint. But just to kind of give you some of the metro nuts and bolts, it would be by requirement a 1-to-4 bike parking ratio. But yeah, we haven't dug too deep into how all that works, but I think it's kind of a foregone conclusion that there'll be hefty bike amenities to this guy.
One thing real quick, I'm sharing my screen, is that Bill, see the hatched line that kind of runs across the parking lot? Can y'all hear me?
We can hear you. I don't know.
Maybe Bill didn't, but for the larger group, that's an outline of the building that sits above those parking spaces. And in the past, with projects where we have this kind of a parking condition, there's lots of opportunities for bike racks on walls. Oftentimes even there's opportunities for racks, next to the building. You can kind of see some of the space that we have. Anyway, I thought that might be a good clarification just in general for people to kind of be able to understand exactly, how we're, parking the units, given the number of units. And that's just kind of to give you guys clarity that there's going to be kind of tuck under parking, which also has a benefit in terms of some alternative forms of storage, especially with regards to bikes.
Thank you.
Did you see all of our trees, Bill?
Yeah, I saw that. I wonder how many are existing trees. Carol and Wayne have some beautiful trees along the side and the front, and I was hoping some of those could stay because I knew you were going to develop this.
Yep. Well, I'll have to say that all.
Yep, they're going to stay.
What's that?
You said yep. Is that yep? The existing trees are going to stay.
Those trees are replanted. We did, so the maple that is on the northern, kind of the north and east corner of the parcel.
Right. It's not Wayne and Carol's house. It's the next house over.
That's right.
Yes.
That's the one. If you look at as you're looking at the site plan, that's kind of where we've pulled off that northern property line and then off of Pillow Street. And we
By
don't
the porch?
know. What's that?
By the porch?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So let's see.
I know that tree.
This one, right? Let's see. Well, I thought I was going to be able to annotate it, but I can't. Anyway, at the moment right now, we're being told that, in order to, that tree, if we were able to, pull back even another 10 or 15 feet, we're still going to be in kind of the drip line, and that there's really, no way to effectively build around that tree in a way, unless we just completely lopped off that side of the building. But that was the intent, was to pull that building back so we have a much larger kind of setback. If we can't save that maple tree, that we would replant something that would be similar, but a large kind of canopy tree that would have, the ability to grow in a way that the trees that are going to be closer to the street can't. So I'm sure that's not an ideal scenario in terms of tree retention. A lot of the trees that are along Merritt are actually, in the right of way, or they're in the area where, the city is requiring us to build, an 8 to 10 foot sidewalk. So it's kind of the dilemma we had at Segment. And I don't know how you feel, Bill, about how Segment's starting to play itself out in terms of the replanting that we did there.
Let me tell you, because I want to apologize, because you know how I was when you started that project. And I've failed to get in touch with you and tell you how happy I am with the planting you've done there.
Oh, good.
A really good job. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we intend to do that, and hopefully a little bit more with this.
I'll be happy to help. Thanks, Andy.
Hi, it's Amanda Schumacher.
As long as you'll give me.
As long as what?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted, but I was saying as long as I can get some more jelly for Christmas.
I got you covered.
Hi, it's Amanda Schumacher. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, so I wanted to kind of have two things to mention, one comment, one question. I'd say the first comment is actually back to something we were addressing with AJ regarding the possible Nike storefront. And I believe Eric had mentioned something about he wasn't quite sure what that would look like. And, you all were talking about what would be like a neighborhood appropriate sort of version of that. And I just wanted to mention in Edge Hill Village, there is a Ralph Lauren store that is, I think it was initially called Double RL. And to me, that's a great example of possibly what this Nike storefront could be like. It's much more boutique-y and kind of appealing to what people who want to shop locally might find appealing, even though it's part of a much larger corporation. So maybe just if anyone's interested in like looking more at what that might look like, Google Nashville, Ralph Lauren, Edge Hill, Double RL. And then secondly, just kind of as a question, which could be addressed by AJ or sorry, the other core, sorry, it's core. A question / comment is kind of along with the parking concerns. Could you speak to what you all are thinking about for like walkability to restaurants? Since we're thinking, oh, well, there will be, less need for parking. What are we thinking about in terms of, restaurants in the area, walkability?
Sure, I'll take that on behalf of our project with the scale, and there'll be some more examples of the opportunities for restaurants. But F&B program is, food and beverage, restaurants is a big part of what we would like to include in our project to address the street walkability throughout National Warehouse Company, May Hosiery, and Humphrey Street Market. But yeah, that's definitely something that would be a big part of our program. Nick, is there anything else that you'd like to add there?
No, I mean, I'll just kind of add to that, like, restaurants like Bastion in the neighborhood, that's a restaurant that we were involved in designing, and still, like, one of, whether or not we were involved in it or not, like, still one of my favorite restaurants in Nashville because of its kind of understated, but, really well done, well curated, and deliciousness of what they serve us. But I mean, I think that's why we align with a lot of I think what AJ's vision is for in particular, all three of these sites. But I mean, a lot of retail that we've done in town, a lot of you probably are familiar with, like Imogene and Willie, Billy Reed, Peter Nappy's former shop at Newhoff, like these really special kind of local, hyper local, only local, but really well done, curated, high boutique brands that I think really are, like, they exemplify local retail, and not only with their product but also their kind of community outreach. I mean, all three of those examples, for example, if any of you guys have ever been in the past to like any of Imogene and Willie's supper and song events in their backyard, or any of Billy Reed's like in-store events, or any of Peter Nappy's in-store events, I mean, all three of those were very integral to kind of the design, but also the brand of those companies. And those were very much tied to outreach and including the neighborhoods that they're within. And I think that those are great case studies of that here in Nashville. And I think all to inform a lot of our work, but also to, I think, have had big influence on that market in Nashville. And those are all very different neighborhoods too. I mean, the first Billy Reed store was in the Hill Center in Green Hills, which is kind of a new urbanist development strip mall, but somehow we created this warm community living room within this 1,600 square foot retail store that hosted some of the most incredible music events that I've ever witnessed. And then the same thing with Imogene and Willie, and kind of what that created in 12 South, and then Peter Nappy, what that created in Newhoff, which is now being redeveloped. But very much kind of placemaking, but also experience-driven businesses, and businesses that are very committed to investing in the community around them.
Yep. Thanks for that. I think that my concern is, like, and I completely agree, those places are, placemaking, really affect a community image. Bastion is a fantastic restaurant, but obviously I can't afford to eat at Bastion too very often. It's a special place to go. Right. So I think probably just a big concern for the neighborhood, we're trying to have these varied price points, micro units, and that's wonderful. But I think we need to prioritize accessibility to healthy, affordable food. So if that's, I don't know if anyone else would echo that, but I would certainly like to walk to more of those places.
I might chime in real quick and just say that I do feel like the two the two things that we're talking about are related in the sense that accessibility to retail that is, for instance, or restaurants that are affordable. I do think that creating spaces for those people who actually need the more affordable amenities is important, to consider. So while the micro units, for instance, I think does create a different product for a different buyer profile who I do think would, be supporting more accessible, more affordable amenities, that don't require driving and don't require making, $300,000 to eat there on a regular basis. And then the other thing too, I might say is, in order to attract maybe those businesses that do usually fall in between the cracks in terms of your typical kind of, tenant cast in any kind of a multi-tenant, commercial building, again, is kind of creating and offering, the market an alternative. And so we kind of feel like, again, that live work kind of format and even the size of these units and the way in which they're designed is a way, it's not the only way, to begin to fill in some of the gaps in terms of particular kinds of businesses, particular kinds of users. And I think the live workspaces that we created down on Martin Street, both at 610 Merritt as well as 1260, you see some of that diversity from kind of small office for, music managers, producers, to test kitchens, to haberdashers, to, a drone startup, company, where he's tinkering with and repairing drones in his garage, things like that I think are indicative too of what the neighborhood seemed to want through that policy process that we had a little over a year ago. So I think you're looking for a spectrum, of offerings. And I think that's both in terms of providing product that allow for different people's lifestyles, and as well as businesses and the different kinds of services to kind of create that ecosystem that's rich and diverse, and doesn't create this kind of homogeneous kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that many neighborhoods kind of end up going down, where you lose that diversity and things become much more homogenous and stale. And I think Wedgewood-Houston has gotten off to a start that's like none other, I think, in terms of kind of creating a trajectory for something really different. But
yeah, I agree.
Thank you for your comment, though, Amanda.
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons I like to use Bastion as an example is that even within Bastion, the operator, Josh, kind of created a little bit of his own spectrum within the door of Bastion, where you have this kind of, more accessible kind of bar that has one menu item, some great nachos. And then, a little bit higher kind of almost Michelin star level, like one of the best in the country dining experiences, under one roof. So I think that takes a real creative operator to kind of pull that off, because that's kind of that was the first of that model that was really kind of, ever pulled off in the city. And that takes a really brave and bold landlord in that case, and also operator and chef and everybody involved. And everyone probably told him he was crazy all along the way. And I think that's that kind of diversity that Andy, touched on. I think that's really exciting to see, because you can build those spaces, but I think the other big factor in that is like who you're going to put in those spaces, and who's going to put themselves in those spaces. And and really, you know, enrich the community.
All right, I think we have time for one more question if you guys have any. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to AJ Capital and to CORE for presenting. We really appreciate you guys, and Hastings as well. If anyone is interested further in any of these topics and you need some time to collect your thoughts, you can feel free to email me privately this week. I am at snaptn@ed@gmail.com. So that's snaptn.ed@gmail.com. And thank you so much for coming to everyone. We're excited about seeing more of you. We're excited about getting together again. And also look forward to another walk with Sean. We're going to be planning one of those for later this fall as well. And we would love to see you there. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great night, and we'll see you later.